A soft pink hue stained the sky as dusk descended on the village of Ferrisvale, painting the weathered stones and twisted chimneys in somber pastel. Townsfolk hurried indoors, shutting windows against the breeze that carried the ominous echo of an unseen chime. The tower stood at the edge of the village, a looming silhouette bristling with ravens' nests and half-shattered gargoyles, its broken spire catching the last scraps of daylight. In the dying light, the heavy chains around its great iron door gleamed faintly, a promise that no living being was meant to cross its threshold. And yet, every night, the bells rang. They tolled in relentless succession, deeper than thunder, summoning sorrowful voices from beyond the pale. Maxim Brandt arrived in Ferrisvale with little more than a traveling pack and a hunger for lost histories. He was an itinerant scholar, known for delving into old scripts and crumbling archives in search of local legends. A man of curious intellect and unwavering determination, Maxim believed that behind every myth lay a hidden kernel of truth. Some months earlier, he had received an anonymous letter detailing the strange phenomenon. Each night at midnight, the Forbidden Tower's bells would ring of their own volition, calling forth the restless spirits of those who had died within its walls. Intrigued, Maxim found himself drawn to Ferrisvale, resolved to learn if this was folklore or a malignant reality. At the local tavern, hushed talk of the tower filled the corners like a cold draught. Men with haunted eyes nursed their ails in silence, and old women whispered dire warnings to any newcomer foolish enough to ask about the tower. Maxim, mustering courage, approached an elderly barmaid, whose name he would later learn was Marta. The lines on her face suggested she had seen many inquirers about the tower, and had lived long enough to know it was best to hush them. When he asked about the midnight bells, her hands trembled as she poured a fresh glass of ale. "You'll want to forget you ever heard those stories," she murmured. "Some nights, the bells are louder than the wind itself. People have gone there to unravel the mystery, but none of them return the same, if they return at all." A hush descended on the remainder of the tavern. It was a silence so complete that Maxim felt his own heart pounding in response. He nodded politely, sensing it might be fruitless to pry further here. Later that evening, he discovered a small, dusty cottage for rent on the outskirts of town, close enough that he might observe the tower. When the landlord dropped the key into his palm, his expression was grave. "Keep your windows locked at night," he said, as if it were a standard caution. But the implication was clear. The ghosts that answered the tower's toll had no respect for boundaries. Once settled in, Maxim wasted little time. He lit a candle, carefully spreading out old maps and sketches on a wooden table. He had an uncanny ability to coax secrets from archaic documents. And sure enough, he found references to the structure known only as the Grey Tower, rumored to have been used as an improvised place of worship in the old times. Then something had happened. Accounts were inconsistent, but they all converged on a single tragedy. The towers collapsed during a gathering, sealing the fates of worshippers inside. The records indicated that no one survived, yet decades later, villagers began hearing bells at odd hours. Some said the lost worshippers took refuge in the tower's darkness, cursing any trespasser who disturbed them. Others claimed a mysterious figure, a caretaker of sorts, still guarded the interior. Yet not a single document spoke of a more detailed explanation for the nightly toll. At midnight, the first toll came, searing through the silent night like a brand on the mind. Maxim's breath caught in his throat, and he crept to the window of his cottage to peer out into the darkness. Through the gloom, the tower stood unwavering. Cold moonlight draped over its spire. The bells rang again, this time more resonant, a toll that shuddered through the bones. An otherworldly hush spread across the village. From Maxim's vantage, he saw faint shapes drifting near the tower's base. Nearly indistinguishable from the darkness, it was a congregation of shadows, writhing silhouettes that slithered in slow circles, their movements punctuated by low moans lost among the bell's reverberations. He forced himself to watch. His rational mind demanded he find a trick of light or a band of nocturnal wanderers, but no. These shapes, these half-lucid apparitions, vanished when the last denominate note faded. All that remained was the hush of the wind and the flicker of Maxim's candle. His courage wavered, but he felt an overpowering urge to see it all again. The next night he set out in secret, determined to stand at the tower's doors when the bell tolled. Rain slicked the worn cobblestones as he made his way through the deserted streets. The tower loomed ahead, its upper reaches seemingly veiled by a swirl of nocturnal fog. The iron door, sealed with chains and an archaic padlock, looked as though it had not been touched in years. Thunder rumbled, and the first midnight chime reverberated through the night air. Maxim gripped the stone wall at the base of the tower, heart pounding so violently he thought it might echo louder than the bells. From the darkness around him, faint, drifting shapes materialized once more. They did not walk, they glided, weightless amid the shadows. With every toll, a new shape, and from the intangible throng, a lone figure stepped forward, dressed in tattered vestments that seemed to flicker between solidity and smoke. This stranger's face was concealed by a rotting hood, only milky, sightless eyes peeking through. The figure raised a bony arm, pointing in Maxim's direction as though beckoning him to face the tower's secret. That moment, Maxim felt an irresistible whisper swirl in his mind. It compelled him to push open the chained door, to breach the age-old boundary that had separated this site of tragedy from the living world. Fear wrestled with his reason, but a strange compulsion fueled him, and he pressed his hands against the door. Some unseen force must have realized he was not yet ready. The chains did not yield. They shrieked and rattled, mocking his attempt. The hooded figure let out a silent, gaping wail, then dissolved with the rest of the shades. The toll ceased, replaced by the echo of rainwater dripping from the gargoyles. Maxim left shaken, soaked, and pathetically aware of his own limitations. Yet he knew. The tower had beckoned him, and he would not be satisfied until he answered its call fully. The next morning he found Marta in the tavern, delicately cleaning glasses at the bar. Her eyes flicked to him, and she sighed as if already resigned to the knowledge that he would not be deterred. Over a shared meal, she divulged the tower's older rumors. More than a century ago, during oppressive times, the place was rumored to host clandestine cult rituals. When the tower catastrophically collapsed one stormy night, dozens of people were trapped inside. Some were crushed by falling debris, others were sealed off, doomed to suffocate or starve in the unreachable recesses beneath the rubble. Days passed before the villagers managed a rudimentary excavation. By then, the living had become corpses, but the tower, stubborn and vengeful, remained partially standing. "Either the spirits want justice," whispered Marta, "or they want to drag more damned souls to their fate. They ring the bells to remind us they are still here, still hungry." Her voice broke slightly. Maxim listened with rapt attention. He implicated no doubt in her stories. This was too consistent with the sightings he'd had. Only one part perplexed him. How, if the tower was sealed, did it continue to produce honest, thunderous peals each night? No ordinary breeze could move a bell's heavy clapper. He needed to see what lay beyond that iron door. Determined, he spent that day searching for clues about the tower's ownership, or perhaps an old caretaker's journal. In the dusty basement of the village's tiny archives, he encountered an unlocked trunk brimming with relics. Among them he found a thick, leather-bound folk grimoire of local legends. It included an entry about the Grey Tower, penned in elaborate script. "He who dares to ring the bell thrice shall awaken the wrathful dead." Though cryptic, the text mentioned a key, hidden long ago by a caretaker who, in his final days, felt remorse for the horrors that had unfolded. Supposedly, this caretaker created a secret vault beneath the floor of his own cottage, which was rumored to lie in the abandoned farmland north of the tower. If the caretaker's key indeed existed, it might be the only way to breach the locks. That afternoon, with the sky choked by gray clouds, Maxim trudged toward the neglected farmland. Tangles of briars and rotting wooden fences suggested it had been deserted for decades. He found a squat stone cottage, partially collapsed from age, with a door flung open. Inside, the air was stale, the floor strewn with decaying furniture. The caretaker, if this was indeed his home, had died many years ago. A faint draft of air emerged from a break in the tiles. Seized with excitement, Maxim pried up the fractured stones. Beneath them lay a tiny compartment made from fitted planks, a cunningly disguised cellar, no bigger than a closet. Within it, he found an iron key, wrapped in ragged cloth. The artifact carried elaborate etchings along its shaft, forming spirals that reminded him of a beckoning vortex. His hands trembled as he hefted the key. The weight of secrets invisible to the eye pressed upon him. That night, he returned to his cottage, carefully stowing the key on a table near the window. As he watched the tower from afar, he envisioned the tolling bells, the swirling ghosts. The caretaker's legacy was now in his possession. By this time tomorrow, he thought, he would be inside the tower, unraveling the dread that had persisted for nearly a century. When midnight came, the bell rang in its usual mournful pattern, each peal teasing the notion of unstoppable doom. Maxim could hardly sleep, haunted by the knowledge that he alone had the power to open the door, that the shadows he had seen might be longing for him to do so. Eventually, in the lull between the final toll and the first blush of dawn, he drifted off into uneasy slumber, dreaming of quiet corridors littered with broken pews and unburied bones, all overshadowed by a ringing that refused to cease. On the following night, the rain had ceased, leaving a mist that wrapped Ferrisvale in subdued gray. The path to the tower was deserted, and no candlelight glimmered from the village windows, as if the entire community sensed the transgressive act about to unfold. The key felt ice-cold in Maxim's grip. Each step toward the tower's chained door set his pulse hammering faster. He approached, heart in his throat, and slid the key into the rusted padlock. For a moment he feared the mechanism would be unusable from disuse, but with a groan of ancient metal, it clicked open. He unraveled the chains and pushed. The door yielded, exhaling the stale breath of ancient stone. Instantly, a blast of cold air erupted from the depths inside, as though welcoming him with a lifeless embrace. Maxim faltered, almost expecting the door to slam shut or the ground to tremble. Instead, profound silence greeted him. Even the wind died in that moment. Mustering his nerve, he lit a lantern and crossed the threshold. Broken staircases curled up the stone walls, and a labyrinth of columns and arches sprawled out in gloom. The walls were crusted with moss, and half of the vault above had collapsed, exposing twisted rafters. In one corner rose a crooked flight of stairs, leading presumably to the bell loft, though it looked precariously steep. Black mold and the stench of rotting timbers suggested the darkest corners had not seen fresh air in decades. A few feet in, Maxim's lantern revealed scattered bones. They were shards more than anything, as though crushed by falling debris. He knelt, carefully pushing aside a fraction of dust. Human femurs, ribs, and fragments of skulls glimmered in the lantern light. That swirl of dread within him intensified. This place had truly been a tomb for many. His every step sent echoes ricocheting across the chamber, stirring up illusion. At times, he thought he glimpsed movement out of the corner of his eye, a figure in tattered robes sweeping across the gloom. He whispered a plea for calm to himself. The caretaker's key clinked softly in his pocket, offering little comfort. Maxim's main goal was to reach the bell loft. Following the spiraling steps he ascended, the stones were clammy and slick with lichen, forcing him to move slowly. Halfway up, the hallway extends past a row of stone pillars that used to support a second floor. This level might have been used for ceremonies or storage. Broken pews lay overturned in piles of rubble. Torn tapestries, their designs long faded, hung from battered iron hooks. Then he heard soft whispers. There was no mistaking them this time. They drifted from the gloom ahead. The air grew heavier, each breath thick and tinged with decay. He pressed on, guided by the sounds. As he reached the last pillar, his lantern illuminated a shape crouched against a crumbling wall. It was a specter, translucent but distinct, clothed in the tattered garments of a time long past. The figure turned, its lifeless eyes meeting Maxim's. Its face was pale, taut skin draped over bone, as though robbed of both humanity and peaceful death. A single bell tolled far overhead, though it was not yet midnight. The echo reverberated through the tower. The specter's lips moved as if it were trying to speak, but its words emerged as dry gasps. Fear hammered at Maxim's senses, but curiosity made him reach out. The ghost gaze flicked the caretaker's key on Maxim's belt, and a tremble fluttered across its form. Then, in a voice like rustling leaves, it spoke. "You doomed us all." Before Maxim could plead for clarity, the figure dissolved, drifting into the gloom like a wisp of smoke. Alarmed, he carried on, unsure what he might have unleashed by opening the door. A ladder led to the belfry, where the tower's massive bronze bell hung suspended in a contraption of rotted wood and iron. He climbed it with care, mindful that a single misstep could plunge him into the darkness below. Entering the loft, he was greeted by the swirling remains of old nest materials and tattered cloth. The bell swayed gently, yet there was no wind, no mortal hand tugging its rope. Cobwebs clung to the crossbeams, and a labyrinth of rope dangled from the bell like an ancient serpent's tail. Midnight arrived with a violent crash of sound. With surreal abruptness, the bell tolled of its own accord, metal clashing against metal in a thunderous chime that rattled the entire tower. Maxim had to brace himself against a wooden beam to keep from staggering. The rope jerked, yanked by unseen hands. Another toll. This time a wave of cold crashed over him, so tangible he gasped. The tower's interior began to glow with ghostly shapes, swirling up the stairwells and drifting through walls, moaning in piteous chorus. These flickers coalesced into half-formed bodies, each sporting battered limbs, vacant eyes, and mouths carved wide in silent screams. Terror coursed through him. He realized the caretaker's key had released them from their prison, the tower's locked doors no longer containing the malevolent energy. The final toll sounded, and he swore he heard the mocking cackle of one who lived among the dead for far too long. In that instant, all of the apparitions poured into the belfry, forming a swirling mass of forlorn souls. A figure materialized at the center of this maelstrom. The same hooded phantom that had beckoned Maxim outside. It pointed to the tower's open threshold below with a skeletal finger. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable compulsion, Maxim scrambled down the ladder, the bell still ringing overhead. The air bristled with moans deep enough to disrupt coherent thought. His lantern flickered wildly, casting smeared shadows across the twisting stairs. A scream, was it his own or a spectral voice, echoed in the darkness. As he raced downward, heart nearly bursting, he glimpsed ghostly forms in every corner, arms outstretched in desperate pleas. One spirit, her hair tangled around a skull-like visage, grasped at his sleeve, leaving a patch of frost where she touched him. He reached the main hall, reeling and breathless. The exit stood open, letting in the cold night air and the faint glow of moonlight. But the swirling ghosts lined the path, floating between him and the door. The largest shape among them took full form, revealing a gaunt figure wearing ceremonial robes. The figure lifted an open palm. For an agonizing moment, Maxim thought it would stop him. Instead, it stepped aside. The rest of the ghosts parted like an inverted funeral procession, silently guiding him toward the exit. Maxim staggered into the night. The second he crossed the tower's threshold, the spectral congregation wailed in unison, a chorus so mournful that tears wailed in his eyes. With trembling hands, he swung the door shut. As if compelled, he replaced the chains and jammed the caretaker's key back into the rusted padlock. Only then did the great bell's ringing subside, leaving a hush broken only by his ragged breathing. He retreated to his cottage, sleep eluding him. Each time he closed his eyes, memories of those pallid faces and contorted limbs haunted him. He had seen their pain, and in some corner of his soul he recognized that they wanted release. But the tower's curse held them in perpetual torment, or perhaps it was their own hateful yearning for vengeance that kept them tethered. Morning found him delirious and exhausted. In clear daylight, the tower no longer seemed ominous, just a relic of old tragedy. Yet, he knew its hold on the nights would continue. He also knew that the caretaker's key alone was not the solution. It had simply permitted him, a living outsider, to enter the realm of the dead. In the midst of searching for answers, he recalled the folk grimoire he had uncovered. He who dares to ring the bell thrice shall awaken the wrathful dead. The line was more than a warning, it was a clue. Some rituals required reversing the incantation that had bound the souls to the bell. The caretaker, racked by guilt, had tried to hide the key to keep the bells locked away forever. But if there was a way to banish these spirits, it likely involved the ritual use of the bell itself. Determined to free the tower's tortured souls, Maxim spent the day gathering supplies, chalk for inscriptions, a candle of black wax he found in a small curiosity shop, incense for cleansing. He combed through the caretaker's notes and the folk grimoire. Ancient references described a bell's capacity to call or dismiss spirits. Typically, a threefold ring summoned them, and a reverse sequence, 3 slow peals at a precise hour, broke the bond. It was uncertain whether the ghosts would move on peacefully or emerge in uncontrollable rage. But the tower's cycle needed to end. That evening, clouds rolled overhead, blotting out the moon. Maxim entered the tower once again, the caretaker's key poised in his hand. Darkness greeted him like a creature starved of company. He lit the black candle and made his way back to the belfry. Stopping at intervals, he drew circles and glyphs across the stone floors with the chalk, guided by the scribbled notes he had compiled. Whispering incantations meant to soothe restless spirits, he pushed on, refusing to let fear conquer him. Upon reaching the bell loft, he found it unnervingly silent. The bell swayed no more, and moonlight did not shine through the clouded skies. Maxim placed the candle near the center of the floor. Heart pounding, he steadied himself and drew a final set of symbols at the belfry's cardinal points. Then, gripping the rope, he gave the bell a languid tug. The toll was low and elongated, as if it came from a depth beyond metal. In the hush that followed, shadows around him began to ripple. A second ring, this one sharper. Ghostly shapes emerged along the spiral staircase, faces twisting with sorrow, arms lifting pensively. Their whispers brushed against his ears, trembling pleas for freedom or condemnation. Summoning all his resolve, he rang the bell a third time. A current of raw spectral energy erupted, surging through the tower. The candle extinguished itself in a swirl of black smoke, and the swirling forms coalesced into a host of apparitions, shrieking in despair and longing. Maxim, nearly paralyzed by their presence, began chanting the words he had copied from the caretaker's book, each syllable a push against the suffocating heaviness in the air. The circle of glyphs glowed faintly, and the ghosts advanced, swirling around the open space in a spiral of flickering light. The hooded figure appeared once again, hands raised, either in command or in supplication. A guttural moan filled the belfry, resonating from the spirits. As Maxim continued the incantation, the shapes began to disintegrate, dissolving into particles of dim luminescence that merged with the dust motes in the stale air. One by one, the apparitions folded in on themselves, leaving faint echoes behind, like the fragments of a lost lament. The swirling column of energy expanded upward, pressing against the bell, and finally faded into stillness. Maxim stood there for a long moment, chest heaving with relief. Darkness returned, a quiet emptiness so profound that it felt oddly comforting. He reached for his lantern, relit it, and saw no sign of the ghosts. Bones still littered the ground, and the wooden beams remained rotted. But the air felt lighter. Descending the steps, he looked back at the bell. It hung motionless, free of the invisible hands that had once enslaved it. Stumbling into the open night, he noticed that the thick clouds had parted, revealing pale moonlight drifting over Ferrisvale. The caretaker's key no longer felt cold in his pocket. Perhaps its purpose was fulfilled. Shaking with exhaustion, he locked the tower door once more, winding the chains back into place. He would leave the key somewhere more secure, maybe bury it far away, so no fool could repeat his mistake. When dawn broke, villagers emerged from their safe havens and found silence where the dreaded toll once resonated. Though no official explanation would likely surface, it soon became apparent that the tower's nightly bells had ceased. No moans emanated at the stroke of midnight, no shapes drifted around its circumference. Though it was early morning, silhouettes of curious townsfolk lingered, half expecting the next toll, uncertain if they dared hope. Maxim observed them from the edge of the village square, quietly satisfied. He lingered another day, gathering final notes and bidding farewell to Ferrisvale's people, who did not fully grasp what had occurred, but expressed timid gratitude nonetheless. Before he departed, he found Marta at her usual place behind the tavern's bar. She gave him a look that was half worry, half relief. "I have not heard the bells," she said. "Not since last night." Her voice held a faint tremor, as if she could not quite believe the hush was real. Maxim mustered a small, tired smile. "They're gone," he said simply. "The spirits can finally rest." Marta bowed her head, her expression one of muted gratitude. She said not another word, and he did not elaborate. Some secrets were better left unspoken, especially those that brushed against the boundaries between life and death. He left Ferrisvale at sunrise. As he crossed the outskirts, the tower stood behind him under a pale sky, silent at last. The caretaker's key lay buried deep in an unknown field, hidden from prying hands. In the months that followed, rumors reached him of travelers passing through Ferrisvale who found no dreadful haunting, only a lonely tower. Some older villagers, once traumatized by the nightly toll, reclaimed a measure of peace. Yet the tower's presence remained as a haunting monument to the fates of those trapped souls. For Maxim, memories of that night still stirred in his dreams, recalling the cold grasp of spectral hands and the final collective wail of the dead fading into oblivion. At times he felt guilty, imagining the caretaker's key might have opened a door that was never meant to be unlocked, but by confronting the tower's secret, he believed he offered the spirits release from unrelenting torment. His rational mind assured him that whatever had been calling from behind those locked doors was not just a legend, but a real curse, needing just such an intervention. On nights when the wind hissed through lonely hillsides, Maxim could almost recall the resonance of that tower's bell, reverberated in the corridors of his mind, lingering as a lesson on the delicate boundary between darkness and light. He had glimpsed the realm of the condemned, and somehow found a way to seal it. Though the hush was fragile, he believed it would endure if no one disturbed that slumber again. Had he not ventured into the tower, the nightly toll would have continued indefinitely, rousing an endless cycle of anguish. Perhaps those souls had prayed for deliverance or believed a caretaker's redemption might eventually come. Only time would tell if the hush was permanent. For now, at least, they were free to fade from memory, and if the gray tower's door ever opened again, it would not be on his account. He had paid the price for knowledge, forging a bond with the silent watchers that once dwelled there. The memory of their sunken eyes and hollow pleas would follow him wherever he roamed. A reminder that some hidden horrors are best left sleeping in their ancient tombs. In the end, no villager would ever truly forget the gray tower's nightly call, but they no longer had to fear it. Night by night, the tower grew still and neglected, its stones peeling away in the changing seasons. The caretaker's key, lost to the soil, kept its secrets guarded, and in the hush enveloping Ferrisvale, the silence spoke louder than any bell's toll, offering a rare reprieve from cursed echoes that had long held an entire village enthralled.